I watched Scream 7 on its opening Thursday night. It was actually the first Scream movie I'd ever seen in theaters. Believe it or not, it wasn't until as recently as a few months ago that I watched the Scream movies for the first time. Contrary to popular belief, I haven't seen every big franchise out there, but every Halloween season I try to watch at least one horror movie or franchise I hadn't seen before. And in 2025, I finally checked out the Scream movies. And then I watched them again recently in the weeks before watching Part 7. Upon first watching it, I found it to be a ridiculous series in terms of its combination of consistent whodunit storytelling, plus the slasher film structure, and always having the same characters being involved in these situations. But, despite its ridiculous attributes, it's amazingly effective in how it's appealed to the masses and endured for 4 decades now, bringing us to the 7th installment, which in part, due to some behind-the-scenes drama, brings the focus back on the girl, or now woman, who is always at the center of it all, and that's Sydney motherfucking Prescott. I saw the movie with a packed Thursday night audience, in regular format, but there was a whole lot of Ghostface shirts and apparel there. I felt like I was in the opening scene of Scream 2. In Scream 7, Ghostface returns to terrorize Sydney Prescott and her daughter. Not exactly a super deep premise, but what else would you expect from a Scream movie? It is the first Scream movie to focus on Sydney Prescott since 2011's Reform, as she wasn't the protagonist of Part 5 and wasn't even in Part 6. But Part 7 takes a whole lot of cues from 2018's Halloween Michael Myers film, where in both films you have a now older, overprotective Scream Queen survivor mom who, due to her past trauma, shelters and protects her daughter. Now, admittedly, not to the same extent as Jamie Lee in 2018's Halloween, but it's still there. Now, given the nature of Ghostface, it's completely understandable for Sydney to be overprotective, as there's only one Michael Myers, but another Ghostface can emerge from anyone. I like the evolution of Sydney's character, and seeing that balance of her trying to keep her family together, but that Ghostface trauma always leading to her never being able to fully trust everyone. Neve Campbell was awesome as always, still great as the protagonist 30 years later. Same with Courtney Cox back again as Gale Weathers. Both of them still looking good too. Now maybe it was the fact that this was the first Scream movie I'd seen on the big screen, but this one did have more of a cinematic look, even compared to your recent Parts 5 and 6. Which didn't look bad by any means, but looked more TV-ish by comparison. Now, Scream 7 was the first in the franchise to be filmed for IMAX, and I really liked how the film looked. I would have liked to have seen it in IMAX, but IMAX showings weren't available for this movie at my local theater, as they were all reserved for the Revenant's 10-year anniversary screening. What the f***? Why would you do that on a Thursday night? But all this is mute because it's a Scream movie, meaning you know the formula you're gonna get. Ominous phone calls, meta commentary, a 6 times out of 7 Sydney Prescott on edge, and of course a lot of stabbing. What I came to realize in watching all the films again recently and watching this film, that it's that consistent formula that's the intended fun here. The fun of the film is them intentionally doing the kind of horror tropes that are going to make the audience go, uh-oh, don't go in there, or trying to guess who the killer is, and just your basic slasher fun in the form of jump scares and gore. I was getting some pretty good enjoyment out of what the film was doing, in part because finally watching one of these movies with a crowd definitely elevates the experience. The different thing about these recent Scream films is how they're able to play around with its legacy characters from the series, outside of Sydney and Gale. Now, I went back and watched the main trailer that released for this movie a few months ago, and the other main legacy nostalgia character outside of Sydney and Gale was not featured in that main trailer, so I will not spoil it here. But it's a fun inclusion, and the movie has a nice gimmick to where it's able to have some fun with some other legacy characters in a nice reminisce kind of way. Speaking of characters, I was curious how the film was going to address that protagonist-sister duo from the previous 2 films, not being in this one due to some behind-the-scenes drama. I think the way it's addressed here, quote unquote, is actually perfect and doesn't mess up anything that you would think from their story. I did like that they still found a fun use for the other 2 members of that core 4 from Parts 5 and 6. For as solid a time I was having mostly in this film, I always think these movies go off a cliff once the killer is revealed. This one in particular is a real doozy. One of the most ridiculous and worst killer reveals of the series, and that's really saying something. But no matter who the killer is, these movies just have ridiculous endings. Now that's part of the fun because you are expecting certain moments, payoffs, leading to some fun reactions. But at a certain point, ridiculous is just ridiculous. Especially with how some characters have that screen plot armor and are able to survive some brutal stabbings that would take out even Wolverine. There are two done towards the end of this film that had everyone in that auditorium saying, bullshit. But it was a nice experience finally watching a Scream movie in the theaters. I got enough fun out of the fun elements that make the franchise what it is, despite how crazy it can get, and it resulted in me liking enough about the movie overall. The movie got fun reactions from the crowd. If you like the Scream movies as a whole, then why the hell wouldn't you like this one? Unless you're just salty about that sister duo from the previous two films not being in this one. The actual best thing about that whole experience that night watching this film was seeing the trailer for Scary Movie 6. I haven't laughed that hard in a while, and those reactions it was getting from the audience were just priceless, so hopefully that movie can be as good as that trailer. As for Scream 7, that'll do it for this review of said 7th installment of the franchise. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.
Mother!